Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 34 of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. I am Anthony Ewing with Thoughttium, and we will get started in just a moment. We want to welcome everybody who is joining today's episode via Zoom. Those folks who have registered can join us in discussion by saying hello in the chat box in Zoom. We also would like to welcome those folks who are stopping by via social media platforms, particularly our LinkedIn audience. We get a lot of eyes in the LinkedIn feed. So if you're scrolling through and you see us and you want to say hello, feel free to say hello in the comments. And if you have any questions for myself or for the guests throughout, you can post those in chat or in comments. We go live every Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock for the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. This is episode 34. We are extremely excited and proud of the community that we're building here as part of the Navigating Now circle of leadership, if you will. And we have a tremendous guest at the table today in Kevin Adler. He is the founder and executive coach at Unstuck. Kevin is a new member to the Navigating Now Roundtable series, but he is not new to the topics of both personal and executive coaching. He works with individuals and professionals alike in elevating their leadership. We know that leadership is taking on new definitions every day. And so today we're here to really unpack, the relevancy of leadership in both you as an individual today and why it's important to continue to invest in leadership in your teams. So Kevin, welcome. And we really appreciate you having you here.
That's a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
I want to dive right in. Tell us about, the title of this article is Value-Based Leadership. And you and I have had a couple of really good discussions on the importance of bringing values to your own leadership style or leadership programs that you're building within organizations. Why values and why values today?
Sure. Well, I would say now more than ever, but forever, values has been at the foundation of everything as human beings that we do. And when we talk about leadership, there's really sort of two layers to that idea, broad stroke. There's being a leader in your own life, right? And then there's being a leader of others. And both of those things operate from a foundation of values. You have to start with clarity on what your personal values are, because those drive every decision that we make as human beings. Every single decision that we make, including the things we choose not to do, are driven by our values. And unfortunately, a lot of the times that process is unconscious for folks. And so the more conscious clarity we can bring to our values, the more consciously we can connect our decision-making to our values. And again, that's as leaders in our own lives and as leaders of others and as leaders of companies and organizations. And ideally, there is a direct synergistic relationship between your values as an individual and the values of the company and the team that you run and operate. And, in a perfect environment and in a healthy functioning corporate environment, those values are not only well communicated, but they are lived and become a living, breathing part of the organization that every employee can align around.
Mm-hmm. Why? Tell us. I want to talk a little bit about your story, because most of the leaders that join us in this discussion at the roundtable have an incredible personal story, and I know yours is a very personal story in terms of the journey that you've led, both in and outside of organizations. Now running your own shop, really focusing on elevating individual and team performance and leadership. Before we get into that, though, what maybe drew you to, values as the foundation of leadership?
Yeah, well,
and I'm talking you personally,
Sure.
because it seems like it's something that is very much in the way that you work and the way that you interact with folks as well too.
I am someone who has always been driven by my values and my passions, and I'm someone who has always tried to operate with a high degree of consciousness in terms of what those values are and how they show up in my life. And one of my core values is constant growth and improvement. I am madly and passionately, personally dedicated to personal growth and improvement. There's a Navy SEAL named Clint Bruce, a retired Navy SEAL named Clint Bruce. I had the incredible privilege of speaking on a panel with him, talk about being, punching above your weight class. And one of the things that Clint said in his speech that day has stuck with me. I think about it every single day. And Clint Bruce said that his goal on Tuesday when he wakes up is to be a better Clint Bruce on Tuesday than he was on Monday, right? And it's that very sort of fundamentally simple idea of constantly being in self-improvement mode. There's a concept in Eastern culture, Japanese specifically, called Kaizen, and it's the idea of forward progress, right? Forward motion. It's less about the destination, or in my world, less about the summit and more about, what the lessons you learn on the way up to the summit, right? To give a sneak peek to some of what I do in my personal life. And so for me, long before I got into coaching, I was already very tuned in to personal growth and self-improvement in my own life, and in some of the things I do and have done for most of my life in terms of mentoring others through the martial arts and just other things I'm involved with. And, when I rounded the corner on my 15th year in owning my own sports marketing agency, I felt the need to layer in work that had more human impact, more societal impact. And so I'm getting a little ahead of us here in the storyline, but coaching is the path I chose to sort of help express that. And, a very fundamental part of the training that I went through in coaching was values-based work. And it was a big aha moment for me that just sort of had natural synergy with some ways I had already been thinking and operating in my life.
Yeah, no, that's great. As a product of good coaching and also as a practitioner of coaching, I have learned that those coaches with their own personal story, and more so the ability to share that story as a way to connect with their community, their coachees, as a way to empathize with the folks that they're working with, and as a way to create the space or a container, as a lot of people are saying, for vulnerability. It's those coaches, right, that have a unique story and the ability to share it that are oftentimes extremely effective. So I want to double click into your story because I think it's a really unique one. And I know that there's a lot of different metaphors to kind of explain, the trajectory of your career. I think the summit one is appropriate though. So tell us a little bit about, your journey, your path as a professional, as a leader. The name of your company is Unstuck. And one of the things that really stood out as I learned a little bit more about you, particularly when I read your bio on your website, is how authentic and transparent you are about those moments in your career where you realized you were stuck.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about your own personal journey that led you to the beginning or the founding of Unstuck, the coaching practice.
Yeah, and I will do that. And before I do, let me just point out you've used three words that I think are at the heart, and I'm using that word on purpose, of effective leadership: empathy, vulnerability, and authenticity, right? And so the fact that those show up in the bio on my website is not an accident. It is a practice in authenticity and vulnerability. And I like to say that I'm not a good coach because I have everything figured out. I'm a good coach because I don't have everything figured out. And I'm on the same journey of self-discovery that most of the people that I work with are on, right? And so it does create some authenticity and some empathy and some relatability. And, one of the coolest things, I'm sure you've experienced this, is everyone I have ever coached, whatever it is that I'm working my way through at that particular moment in time in my life, happens to be the thing that shows up for the person I'm coaching. So we get to learn together as we go along the way. It's one of the very cool privileges of doing this work. That being said, to answer your question directly, or at least as directly as I'm capable of, I started out born and raised in suburban Chicago, and when I went to a high school out here that had an FM radio station and a cable TV station. One of the very lucky folks who got to come up in that educational environment, and it just found me and I found it, and I was madly in love with it. And so I had a radio show in high school on our FM station called the Adler Hour, and I was heavily involved in our television production program at Glenbrook South High School in Glenview, Illinois. And if you would have asked me at age 15, I had it all the way figured out. I would have told you I'm going to be a field reporter for Channel 5. I would have told you what street I was going to live on. I would have told you I had my dog picked out. I had my whole life mapped out. And I very intentionally worked towards that pathway through college. Majored in broadcast journalism with a double minor in sociology and psychology, came out of college with a ton of a 3-page resume of real working experience in broadcast journalism. While my friends were partying in South Padre, I was working for free for CNN and Fox and whoever would have me, so that I could come out of school and hit the ground running, because I'm pretty type A and I knew this is what I wanted to do. So let's get going. When I came out of school, the way that the broadcasting industry worked was you had to move to Skidoo, Iowa, and work for the one camera station, where you set the camera up on the tripod, ran in front of the camera, did your stand-up, took it back to the station and edited it, and then moved 20 times to 20 different markets before you landed in a major market. And I decided at that point in time that I was not willing to make that sacrifice to pursue that dream. And it's something that I talk a lot about when I'm talking to college kids is, set a big dream and then be realistic along the way. If you're willing to make the sacrifices to make that dream happen. And if you're not, that's okay. Be honest with yourself and pivot, right? And so at that point in time, I made the first of what turned out to be many pivots in my life. And I pivoted to what I call the other side of the phone, which is to say, when I was working in the newsroom at Fox here in Chicago and at CNN in the Chicago Bureau, I would get the calls from the PR people pitching the turtle races and the restaurant openings and all the terrible bad PR pitches that I got to hear. And I got to learn very quickly what made for an effective pitch and what made for just a fundamentally bad one. And so I moved to the other side of the phone and started working in PR. I moved from PR to sports PR to sports marketing. I'm trying to accelerate the pace of this story so that we're not here until Tuesday, because I got a flight to catch on Saturday.
It's important.
So PR to sports marketing. And in January of 1998, I joined a 2-person group within the Leo Burnett family of companies. Burnett had spun its media planning and buying operation out into a separate company called Starcom. And in January of 98 or 99, the timeline is fuzzy to me at this point, I joined a 2-person group called Starcom Sports Marketing. We were an incubator within this media company, and we would consult for Starcom's clients on how to reallocate small percentages of their media spend towards a sports marketing and a sort of a more experientially based engagement campaign. I joined to build and run Allstate's Women's World Cup sponsorship, which was the first national corporate sponsorship in the 67-year history of that Fortune 100 company. It was a big success. We really kind of built an agency on the foundation of that work. Fast forwarding to 2001, we relaunched Starcom Sports Marketing as an independent agency brand within the holding company called Relay. We built Relay to become one of the biggest players on the global stage in sponsorship and experiential marketing. I was on the global management team, sitting in the office next to the CEO, heading up our consulting practice, our new business practice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a great gig. It was a 6-figure salary and a ton of very cool, very high profile perks. And I was flying around the country, speaking at conferences and being quoted in Time Magazine and Wall Street Journal and, interviewed on the Today Show and all that cool stuff. And there was something kind of gnawing at me that I just felt very restless as time went on. And as I approached my mid-30s, I realized that I needed to go do, instead of complaining about everything that was broken, I needed to go do it myself and build the better mousetrap and then go evangelize that. So in 2006, I launched my own agency called Engage Marketing, sponsorship and experiential marketing, consulting for Fortune 1000 consumer brands. Every agency has to have that Cinderella story. We were named Agency of Record for Crocs within 2 months of me launching the agency. At the time, by market cap, Crocs was the 3rd largest footwear company in the world, and we controlled 80% of their total marketing spend for a couple of years. It was truly a Cinderella story. We were off to the races right out of the gates and, did 7 figures of revenue in our first 12 months in business. 2008 hit and, everything changed in the economy for everybody, and the agency world was no exception to that. We bounced back from that. We, diversified our services, blah, blah, blah. And along the way, I started getting that same restless feeling again. Here I was, if you have read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek, I had a very compelling and powerful why when I started the company, and it drove me to run through walls to make it happen. When I started Engage, I would get up early in the morning, I would go to the office, which was borrowed space from one of my vendors in a building that has since been condemned and knocked down. But at the time, I had an office with no real HVAC, no real ceiling tiles. It was a really cool part of the story. And I would get to the office early in the morning. I would hammer away all day. I would come home. I would have dinner with my wife and daughter, and then I would go back to the office because I was driven by my why.
Mm-hmm.
As the years wore on, I started to become a little disconnected from my why. And this is the point at which my personal and professional story kind of intersect. In 2015, I made the hardest decision of my adult life, and I asked for a divorce. You talk about values. One of my absolute core values, it is literally tattooed on my shoulder in Hebrew, is I don't quit. I believe I can power through anything. And I had been applying that ethos to a dysfunctional marriage and the entrepreneurial journey at the same time, both of which take a tremendous amount of energy. Something had to give in that equation. I asked for a divorce. The process took about a year. During that year, I would kind of put my shoulder down and lean into the work of being an entrepreneur and running a company. And I had people working for me and clients with high expectations. And I would tell you that by 2017, I was pretty disconnected from my why. I was kind of on autopilot. There was nobody to resign to. I started the company. I've never worked for a bigger jerk, by the way. And and I had a very public identity tied to this company that I had built, and I had people working for me and all this infrastructure built around me. And I had become a little bit of a prisoner to it. And it got to be pretty unhealthy. I mean, I couldn't not show up, but I wasn't really showing up. And there were days, if I'm being very honest, where I would get to the office. I had people, we had these glass walls on the exterior of our individual offices. So the people that worked for me could see into my office, and I had to show up and at least in appearances, look like I still, gave a shit. But there were days where I would come in and screw around on social media for 6 hours and then go home. It was really, really unhealthy at that point. In 2018, I made my next major difficult decision, which was to put the company on hold and take a breather. The breather came in the form of a 1-month trip to Nepal, where I was part of an Everest expedition team. I trekked to Everest Base Camp and then climbed a neighboring peak called Lobuche Peak, which is 21,000, I believe, 20,000 and change, something like that. And people said to me, you're going to come back from this trip, you're going to be so refreshed and re-energized, and you're going to dive back into your business. And they were partly right. I came back from the trip. I was in Nepal for a month. I came back from Nepal. I gave my body a day to recover. I had gotten rid of my office space at this point and all my staff, and wound down the last of our active client projects. So I came back from Nepal. I opened the laptop and I sent out 10 new business emails. Hi, I'm Kevin. This is Engage. This is what we do. I think we can help you. Can we talk? Right? And I turned and I looked at my golden retriever and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I shut the laptop down. And thankfully, he didn't answer back. That would have been a real warning sign. But I shut the laptop down, and that 1-month sabbatical turned into 12 months. And during the first 2/3 of that 12-month sabbatical, it was cinematic. It was my own little eat, pray, love. I went on a couple of international climbing and backpacking trips. I took guitar lessons with a guy who used to open for the Allman Brothers. I got really, really into cooking and fitness. I would take my dog to the beach. I mean, anything that crossed my mind, I just did, right? And it was pretty magical and until it wasn't, which is to say, when you've worked out for 2 hours, made yourself a healthy breakfast, practiced guitar, taken the dog to the beach, met a friend for lunch, and you get to 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you've kind of run out of things to do, and you're not going to bed until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, that's a lot of daylight left to kill. And it became, the latter third of that 12 months became what I call a prison of purposelessness, which is another important phrase that I think might come up more than once in this conversation, the idea of purpose, right? And it became the next unhealthy pattern that I was stuck in, right? I was very stuck in my marriage. Then I was very stuck at Engage. Now I was stuck in the structureless purposelessness of my sabbatical and my freedom, right? And I started thinking about, it was time to get off the bench and get moving again. And I started thinking about, well, what do I want to do? And the low-hanging fruit, a phrase, by the way, which I passionately hate, because it's rarely as low-hanging as you think it is, and it never tastes good when you actually get it off that low-hanging branch. The low-hanging fruit would have been to flip the light switch back on and engage and go back to sending those stupid emails saying, hi, I'm Kevin, here's what we do, can we talk? And there's this very powerful saying, if you do what you've always done, you'll have what you've always had. And I didn't want that. I wanted more than that. So I started really proactively thinking about, well, what is it that I actually wanted? Turns out to be one of the most powerful questions that I ask in some of the personal one-on-one coaching work that I do. What do you want, right? And the word that kept coming up for me was impact. I've had a coach for 8 years now. She was instrumental in helping me work my way out of an unhealthy relationship and untangle various other knots that have come up for me personally and professionally along the way. And I thought, my goodness, if I could have the kind of impact on one human being that Sarah has had on me, that would mean more to me than a shelf full of marketing awards and a career full of cool experiences and media coverage and all the other stuff that came with it, right? In early 2019, I dipped my pinky toe into the coaching training curriculum offered by a global organization called CTI. And I was open to it and curious about it, but skeptical. You know, there's, I think, 5 3-day courses in the CTI core curriculum. And if you know in your soul that this is what you want to do, you buy the whole thing all at once as a bundle and you save a ton of money, right? I figured I'll dip my pinky toe into the first 3-day course and see what happens. And if it grabs me by the throat, awesome. And if it doesn't, I'll figure out what my plan B is. I get there for the first day of the first course. I look around, there's 26 of us in the room in a U shape. And the front of the room leader gets up and she arbitrarily picks one of the 26 of us, this guy, Nathan, a tech exec from Detroit. And she starts coaching Nathan just cold on the spot. She doesn't know Nathan from a hole in the wall. She just goes in. 10 minutes in, Nathan is crying, having a life-changing epiphany. 12 minutes in, 25 of us are crying, watching Nathan have a life-changing epiphany. And I am sitting there gobsmacked. I said, this is it. This is absolutely it for me. This is the chance to have the impact that I want. I dove all the way into the curriculum. I launched my coaching business in the spring of 2019, along with relaunching Engage, repositioned as more of a strategic advisory service than a full-blown agency. And it has been full steam ahead since then. I've been focused primarily on the coaching business since launching it and relaunching Engage. And I've been super privileged to work with leaders and everyday folks from every walk of life and from all over the country and helping elevate their level of intentionality. There's really kind of 2 big picture buckets that I focus on: intentional living and intentional leadership.
So that is a long climb.
No pun intended.
I also really, really appreciate the way that you kind of took us through from, you know, the foot of the mountain to base camp to the summit, right? Because that the story that you share, there's so much there that I think we can learn from. So I have a couple follow-up questions that, you know, might help our audience, you know, understand kind of your mentality and where you're at in some of these inflection points. Because when I zoom out of that story, Kevin, what I hear is that there were almost these monumental moments in your life that when you zoom out, you would expect those to enact some sort of change or some sort of, to your point, kind of magic or epiphany, you know, getting the promotion at work, starting a company of your own, getting Crocs as a client, right? But what you found was that it was the space in between the actual benchmarks that you had set out where you were doing the majority of the changing, right? And that it didn't necessarily take these milestones or these benchmarks necessarily. And oftentimes when you got to those benchmarks or their milestones, you kind of sat there and looked around and said, wait, aren't I supposed to feel fulfilled? Aren't I supposed to feel like motivated to go on to the next one? So tell us a little bit about that. Like, because I think there's a lot of people that maybe can relate to, you know, whether it's, you know, we call it, you know, chasing the Joneses, or in career, we can relate to the next promotion or starting a business of your own. And those folks who are super motivated and who do take the risk to get the promotion or start the business, oftentimes get the thing and they stand there and say, this is not what I was thinking it was going to feel like.
Yeah. There's 3 analogies that I will share with you, one of which has never occurred to me until right this second, but there's 3 analogies I'll share with you that I think help illustrate this point that you are so astutely observing. The first of which is this. I drive a Tesla. and it has autopilot, right? But here's the thing about autopilot in a Tesla, and there's a metaphor for life. Autopilot in a Tesla reminds you every so often to put your hands on the wheel. If you stay in autopilot too long, autopilot will disable itself for your own good in your Tesla, right? And what a beautiful analogy that is for life, because what I have found over the course of my life is anytime I have gone on autopilot for too long in any aspect of my life, I have these wake up moments where I need to grab the wheel and take control consciously, intentionally again. So I think it's a really important metaphor. The other two metaphors that I will share
before you jump forward, can I also add to that metaphor? Autopilot oftentimes is achieving, meaning we can be in autopilot achieving. And it's something that I'm just curious, when you work with highly motivated leaders, those folks who are used to getting the thing, starting the business, getting the promotion, how do you help them see that the next milestone may not fulfill you?
Sure.
How do you almost shake them and say, hey, you're on autopilot and it feels like achieving, it feels like acquiring, it feels like growth.
Yep.
But let's reduce the time it takes for you to have that real aha moment.
Sure.
And really ask yourself, and you said that ultimate question, which is, what do you really want to do?
That's right. Well, and it's how are you committed to growth, and are you connected to your values? Because I promise you this, that I'm not poo-pooing achievement. I'm a type A human being. I love achievement, right? But achievement is an expression of what you're good at, right? And no growth comes from that. And I'm going to connect that to the next analogy. No growth comes from expressing what you're good at. It's a reinforcement of what you're good at, right? But growth doesn't come from that, right? I play guitar. People are going to find I have a really diverse range of interests by the end of this discussion. But one of them is I play guitar. I'm in a band. And when I pick up my guitar to practice, the hardest thing for me to do is practice something that I suck at, right? Listen to this point because it's really important. My natural inclination when I pick up my guitar is to play songs that I have absolutely grooved, that I know how to play and that sound incredible, right? Incredible might be a little generous, but that sound good, that I sound competent in, right? And I'm not growing as a musician when I do that. It's fun. I enjoy it because it's reinforcing and validating that I'm good at what I'm good at. But I'm not learning from that. It's the clunky, what Brene Brown calls the messy part, the messy middle. That's where all the growth happens. And so the next analogy or metaphor that I'll jump to is my other big hobby, which is mountain climbing, right? And, you talk about the shortest time that you spend on any climb is on the summit. Usually, well, not usually, it's always the place with the least amount of oxygen. So from a fundamental biophysical standpoint and a safety standpoint, you can't spend a bunch of time up there, right? So you get the shit kicked out of you getting to this destination, and then you can't stay there for too long. And I think it's another really important analogy, right? Because all of the growth is happening on the way up to the summit. And again, I am an achievement-oriented, goal-oriented, driven type A person. And in January, February of 2020, I went for summit number 3 of the 7 summits. It's called Aconcagua. It's the highest peak in South America, and it is a beast. It is an absolute nasty, nasty climb. Unless you're climbing the 7 summits, which means you have to do Aconcagua to check that box, I don't recommend Aconcagua. And it's the first time in my life, if you take marriage out of the equation, it's the first time in my life I ever set a goal and didn't accomplish it, right? Every race I've ever signed up for as a runner, I have finished and progressively gotten better at over time. Everything I've ever set out to do, I come from competitive athletics where you work hard, you set a goal, you do the work, you accomplish that goal. If you fall short of the goal, you just go back and work harder and you go back at it. I came up short of the summit on Aconcagua. It was absolutely crushing. I was a grown man, hysterically, uncontrollably crying on the side of a mountain for an hour. I was devastated. It's the first time it's ever happened to me. I cry on every climb, but that's the first time I've ever cried because I didn't reach a goal, a destination. And I can tell you that I learned more from that trip and that experience. It has absolutely transformed who I am as a climber and as a human being, and how I train, and my mentality going into my next climb. And so this idea that how do you get people to understand the idea that that it's not, that the growth doesn't come from achievements, is by connecting them to their values and asking them whether they're interested in growth. Some people aren't. There's a really, really powerful question in coaching, which is, you're invited to stay right here. You're invited to stay right where you are. Is that what you want? Right. And I have yet to have anyone answer, yeah, I'm actually going to just choose to stay stuck. Right. But by asking that question, it consciously,
it's so provocative.
It's so powerful.
I can feel it even with you just saying it, as someone receiving that message. It really is uncomfortable almost.
Yes. Well, that's the idea, right? It's
that's the idea.
That's the idea. And ultimately, to drive this all home, all growth comes from discomfort.
Yeah.
All growth comes from discomfort. It does not come from doing what you're great at, right? There's beauty in the expression of your competence, right? There's absolute beauty and art in expression of what you're great at. If you're a great musician, I'm not, but if you're a great musician, it's beautiful to watch a great musician express their competence, right? Their excellence. It's beautiful to watch. I'm friendly with an Olympic snowboarder, and to watch this guy carve his way down a hill is extraordinary, right? If I put him on telly skis, he'd be way out of his comfort zone, and he'd be growing and learning something.
Listen, if anybody gets anything out of this episode, I know that I just learned a big lesson in the difference between achievement and growth. I don't know if I've ever heard it positioned that way, because you would think that they're almost synonymous. If not, they go hand in hand. And the juxtaposition between achievement and expression of what you're good at, and growth, the messy middle, the failing, the falling down, the crying, and the not knowing what's next.
Right.
And
it connects back to that idea of vulnerability, right? And which is what makes us human, which connects back to the idea of leadership, because we were talking before this streaming started, and ultimately the best leaders are the most human leaders. And to be human, you need to be vulnerable, and all the growth happens when you're vulnerable.
Yeah, and I want to get there in a minute, just in terms of what we can do as leaders to demonstrate some of these behaviors. But I want to stay on achievement versus growth. When you think about growth, and so now the game is celebrating the process, understanding and being okay without the answers, discerning when I'm achieving versus when I'm growing, and understanding like which space I'm in. Because like you said, there's a place for both. Do you think that it takes a certain level of retrospection, looking back, to understand more about kind of yourself and understand when you're in the achieving space versus the growth space? And I ask that because myself, as I've grown as a professional and as I've grown as a man, the ability to stop and take a look back and understand when maybe at the time I wasn't realizing that I was in a achievement pattern, if you will, that I wasn't truly growing, has been extremely useful and powerful to me, to where, I just turned 40, and I've been telling, my friends and family that at 20, the turn from 19 to 20, or even 29 to 30, was so prospective. It was about all of those achievements that I had in front of me. And like you at, Glenbard North High School, I was reverse engineering the dog and the white picket fence and the job and, the Ironman triathlon and all of these things. And it was so prospective, which put me in many cases in a bit of an achievement pattern. And now that I have the opportunity, from 39 to 40, to pause and take a look back, I realize that I'm able to zoom out and understand the difference, right, between growth and achievement, and when I really was achieving versus when I really was learning and growing.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty visceral in terms of the difference in how they feel. When I'm, choose your metaphor, when I'm practicing a lead pattern that I don't know and that I'm not comfortable with, it feels uncomfortable and it sounds clunky, right? I'm working on Blackbird right now. Such a beautiful song, right? And I used to really be able to play it well, and it's been 20 years since I've tried. And it sounds clunky. I sound like a beginner, right? And if I were to play Little Pink Houses, which I've played 1,000 times, right? It would sound, there would be a flow to it, right? Well, I'm not learning anything when I'm playing Little Pink Houses and yes, retrospection, introspection. I'm going to make up a word that doesn't exist, presentspection, right? Being present in the moment and tuned in enough to know at a very visceral level how it feels. If you're in flow, if you're doing something you're naturally good at, that you're just gifted at, right? You'll feel that flow. You won't feel any dissonance. You'll feel resonance, right? We talk about dissonance and resonance a lot in coaching, and there can be a positive lesson affirming form of dissonance, right? Which is this idea that, oh man, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm figuring this out as I go, and it sounds messy. It feels messy, right?
Yeah, I love that. And maybe to bridge a little bit, I believe that at the heart of that introspection, that retrospection, what did you say? The presentspection, which I love. At the heart of that is when you really do sit with yourself as a leader, as a friend, as a family member, as a human, and you're able to kind of peel everything away. At the center lies your values.
Yes.
And, I would argue that 2020, if anything, was this kind of collective calling, right? Or a calling for everybody, professionally, personally, to hold on to what matters most to them. So let's talk about values and, how do you bring values into your individual coaching discussions? Is that different than the way that you bring values to a group of leaders? What does that look like?
Yeah, I kind of start in the same place, to be honest with you, because your values are your humanity. This is going to get a little heady for a second here, right? But your values are your humanity. And if you're not connected as a leader to your humanity, because what are you leading? You're leading a group of humans, right? And so
you might need to say that 2 or 3 times, right? I mean, it's simple, but we need to remind ourselves that.
What does a leader lead? The company is a collection of human beings and processes and products. That's all a company is. I'm grossly oversimplifying, obviously, right? But what makes a company beat, the beating heart of a company, is its people, right? Those people have to adhere to a process and deliver a product, but it's the people that make it happen. So as a leader, you are leading a group of human beings. And if you're not connected to your humanity, and there are a lot of leaders who aren't, that will show. And those companies have high turnover. Those companies have disconnected cultures. Those companies are full of people who have no idea what the company's values are, that don't feel appreciated, that don't feel engaged, that aren't aligned around a mission, that won't go above and beyond, that aren't driven by a collective and powerful why, right? Your values, your why comes out of your values, and your values are your humanity. So I really start in the same place for a personal life coaching engagement that I do for a leadership coaching engagement, which is, we call it values mining. And the first thing I do process-wise is not a formal coaching session. It's called a discovery session. And I ask 30, 40 of the coolest questions that you've ever been asked. I joke with single friends of mine that they're the best first date questions ever, because you really get to know somebody at a very human level. I'm going to use that word human and humanity a lot. And what you net out with at the end of a discovery session is what I call your values set. And it is a written list of your values. And we all draw from a universal set of values. And there's some beautiful nuances to this conversation, by the way, because there's values, right? And we end up with our values set. And then you have to understand the idea of values prioritization, because in any decision, you're calling forth one value that is the prioritized value in how you are making that decision. And by definition of prioritizing a value in making that decision, you are by definition subjugating some other value, right? And so the more conscious you are, and I'll use an example from, the personal side of coaching. I do work with parents, right? I do parenting coaching as part of the life coaching work. And if you have someone who in their value set as a parent says that maybe they've got working mom guilt, for example, and they say, being there for my kids anytime for whatever they need is a value of mine. And then another value of theirs is I want to raise independent, capable, confident, grateful, et cetera, kids, right? Well, in any given parenting decision, those two values may do this. And so you've got to choose which one you're going to prioritize in that given decision, right? And the more consciously connected you are to your values, the more consciously you are making your decisions. And the exact same thing applies to leaders. Yeah. It just does.
I love that. A couple of things I'm hearing here. And we bring values to teams of leaders in different ways, but there's a few things that remain consistent. One is the concept of a core set of values that can come in and out of both the way that you work and also the way that you live and love.
Yes.
It's never a ranked list 1 to 5, right? It's a very fluid, set of core values that we bring in and out. The other thing that we like to do is, we do like to clarify that, and I always call on a great, I'm going to butcher this quote, but it's a quote from Elvis Presley around values. He says they're like fingerprints. Everybody's aren't the same, and you leave them all over everything that you do.
Oh, that's brilliant.
The second part of that, I think, is so strong in that, oftentimes when we're trying to define our own values or we're working on corporate values, to your point, it gets a little lofty, it gets a little heady, and all of a sudden it's a set of, 4 words with some great icons that are, painted on the wall of the company that we work for. It's bringing them into action that shows that you wear your values on, some people say it's what's on the back of your shirt as you walk around every day. Elvis would say it's the fingerprints that you leave around. And so there's exercises that we like to do, that put values into action. One of those is by identifying both the supportive behaviors of your values and the slippery behaviors. Like when does this not look like you're putting this value forward? And what does good look like? So I love, the idea of kind of starting with that core set of values, but then immediately dropping into like how you can apply them day to day.
Well, it's such an important point. I mean, if you aren't, especially on the corporate side, it's certainly in the personal side as well, but especially on the corporate side, if they become lip service and just a fluffy set of words on the wall, you will lose more credibility with your employees and all of your other constituents than you would by not expressing them in the first place. They have to be lived, not just said, right? And there's a linear sort of process that I go through with folks, and it's values, vision, action, accountability. That's sort of the 500,000 foot view of the linear process. And again, it translates both to the personal work and the corporate work. If you have to start, on the leadership and the corporate side, you have to be grounded in your values as a leader and as a company, as an organization, right? You have to have a clear vision for where you want to go and how you want to live those values, right? You have to put it into action, and then who's holding you accountable for it, right? And have you created, especially on the corporate side, have you created a platform to be held accountable for it? Is your board a puppet board, right? We've all seen puppet boards that don't have an actual voice, right? Well, if you don't have people, forgive my French, but if you don't have people that can call bullshit on you, and if you aren't giving your employees a voice, and if your board isn't holding you accountable, then it falls down at that step.
Yeah. We have a question that came through in chat, and it touches on an earlier topic around, and I knew that folks were going to be interested in this because, I'm still playing with it in my mind, and I just think it's so valuable and effective. Again, the difference between achievement and growth. So we've got a question in chat from Nikhil. Nikhil, thanks so much for posing this question. I think it's a good one. Nikhil says, although growth is the messy part in the middle and achievement is separate to that, how would you validate that you are in fact growing and not remaining stagnant? Is it through achievement, or would they still remain separate? So I think the question there is, we were kind of discerning the difference between achievement and growth.
Sure.
How do you know when you're growing? I've got some thoughts, but I want you to start.
Yeah, what a smart question. What a really smart question. I mean, I think I think you measure growth through change, right? Through and change can be little change or transformative change.
Mm-hmm.
It's all measurable, right? And so we can apply this to, you can choose again any of the metaphors or any scenario and illustrate it, right? I'll stick with a couple of the metaphors that we've played with so far, right? Blackbird's going to get better. It's going to sound like it's supposed to, and that'll be growth, right? And here's the thing. I mean, it plays out beautifully in this metaphor. So at the point in time at which there was a point in time at which I couldn't play Pink Houses by John Mellencamp, right? It's not that hard of a song, but it's got a tricky little opening thingy and it's got a weird rhythm to it. And there was a time at which I couldn't play it, right? And so the messy part was me learning the song, right? The growth was me getting better at the song, right?
Yeah.
The achievement, if you will, is the fact that I don't really believe in mastery, but I've mastered the song, right? And when you achieve mastery, it's okay to continue to revisit that and continue to express that mastery, but it's time to move on to the next challenge, right? Otherwise, you will return to stagnation, or you will achieve, you will arrive at stagnation, right? And so, again, pick any metaphor you want there. I mean, Blackbird is messy now. I'll measure the growth by when it starts to get smoother and cleaner and better. And when it becomes the song I play perfectly every time I pick up the guitar, and I'm using perfect in air quotes as well, but when it becomes the song that I play with a high degree of confidence and competence every time I pick up the guitar, it's time to do something else.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll add, there's another quote that I heard recently that I thought was really great. And it was around, I think this kind of growth and achievement. And it is the extent to which you want something is the extent to which you're not willing to let it go.
Sure.
And this is, I think this sits at the center of this kind of growth and achievement paradigm here, where oftentimes, and I think Nikhil's question is a good one, achievement can serve as benchmarks. Could I get on stage and play Blackbird the song? Can I run the race in 10 minutes fewer than the year before?
Yeah.
But oftentimes growth is in actually taking away those benchmarks and saying, I need to just hold to my values on a day-to-day basis. And a perfect example of this would be if I wanted a great relationship, or I wanted the next promotion. My mind as an achiever is, okay, I've got to reverse engineer this promotion. What do I need to do between now and then to get that job, including getting the interview set up and submitting the resume, et cetera. But I think one of the most powerful things about values is that they allow you to take away the achievement as a benchmark, focus on what is most important. Am I going to live every day with integrity in front of my team? Am I going to sharpen my craft and deepen my practitionership in my current role?
Yeah.
Am I going to take a growth mindset in everything that I do, regardless of whether it's a promotion or it's kudos from my boss or it's a merit increase?
Yeah.
And so I like the idea of achievement serving as benchmarks, but it doesn't always have to be the thing that you need to measure growth.
Oh, yeah, there's a really important and beautiful nuance in this discussion, and it's the idea of being mindfully present, right? Because if you're constantly focused on forward motion, and it really is a nuanced point, if you're constantly focused on forward motion, you run the risk of missing the beauty of the present moment. There is this cool company that I think they're called Intent. I can't remember, but they make these bracelets, right? They were all the rage a couple of years ago, and you put your word on the bracelet, right? And I made one for myself to express my intention for when I climbed Kilimanjaro, and the bracelet said mindfully forward, right? Because it expressed for me perfectly that duality of I've got to make my way up the mountain. I've got to continuously move forward, but I want to be mindful along the way. I want to be present. I want to experience everything that's happening in each moment on my way up. And if I'm strictly focused on what's next, I'm missing what's now. So it is a beautiful, really nuanced idea there.
I love that. Okay, and I promise we're not gonna click into this any further. But Nikhil, you and I and Kevin at some point maybe need to go and grab coffee, because I think your follow-up was just a tremendous capstone to this whole concept. So Nikhil says, as a follow-up, would achievement then be a point in time and growth is ever living? And I love that, because to what Kevin just said, achievement oftentimes is the present moment. It's the understanding and the acceptance of exactly where I'm at today, and growth is the endless cycle, right, of ensuring that you remain true to your values and at times uncomfortable in following them.
And we can riff on achievement and the broad spectrum of how you define achievement forever, because I would argue that me choosing to, again, just to work with the metaphor, me choosing to play the thing that I don't know how to play is an achievement, because I could just as easily play the thing I'm good at, right? So when there's achievement or opportunity for achievement in every choice we make. And if you're connecting a choice to a value, that's an achievement to me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Nikhil, thank you so much for the engagement. If anything, I hope these discussions do serve as a bit of a kind of mind bender in some ways, right? I mean, you take two concepts such as growth and achievement, so simple and so well defined, but yet, when you unpack them through the lens of personal growth and professional growth, they could mean totally different things. So again, I just appreciate the engagement on that one, and thank you for your very thoughtful questions. Okay, we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to maybe just ask Kevin on your perspective on the importance of coaching today. Why is it so important today? Why do you feel like you, at this point in your life, are so called to, meeting people exactly where they're at in their growth and their achievement? And for those of us who are maybe thinking about coaching as a tool or, as something that they might need personally or professionally, what are some of the first steps that they can take to ensure that they're being supported in the right ways?
Yeah, what a great compound question. So I'll try and break it into its parts. I am called to coaching, and I really do feel like I am called to coaching because I have always been passionate about, and someone recently described it as a superpower of mine, seeing and helping unlock potential, right? And if you are stuck as a human being, as a leader, as a company, right? You are not achieving your highest potential. And I'll just use the sort of the personal as the metaphor for all of it. If you unlock your full potential, then you give your greatest gift to the world, and think about the ripple effect of that, right? If we can create a world, this is going to sound a little panacea, but if we can create a world of people who are consciously connected to their values and intentionally expressing those values in everything they do, that's a very different world. And that's a world where people are showing up as the absolute best of who they are for themselves, for their family, for their children, for their community, and for the world at large. And there's some pretty powerful things that can happen when you're operating from that base. And so when I often say, I'll believe in you until you catch up with me, right? And I get the chills when I say it, because it's just part of the most powerful part of the work, right? And I believe in our unlimited potential as human beings. And the quote that's actually tattooed on my shoulder in Hebrew is the Hebrew words koach panim, which mean inner strength, because it's in you. It is the tagline for Unstuck is the phrase, it's in you, because I believe we are limitless in our capacity to overcome adversity, our resilience, our inner strength, our deep knowledge of what's right for us and what's right for the world around us. And if I can connect you to that, man, does that make a difference in the world? And that's that impact that I was looking for when I was on that journey of what's next for me. And so it's the most rewarding thing I've ever done in my life, and I've done some cool things. So I'm really privileged to do this work.
Yeah, I can imagine. And Kevin, it's extremely evident that coaching, elevating both individuals, teams, organizations is is your practitionership. We define practitionership as the work that you love to do every day. If you had to treat your work like an art form or a craft, what would that be? It's very clear what your practitionership is really focused on. And it's clear that that's also fueled by your own story and your own path. And if there's, one or two or three common themes that come through in every one of these Navigating Now discussions, is that we as leaders are today more empowered than ever to bring our own story to the table as a way to invite people in. And I love your quote around holding space for people wherever they're at. And whether you are the coach or the coachee, it is a bi-directional relationship. And I would encourage folks to, when they seek a coaching relationship, to find those leaders that have a really great story of their own and who are willing to share that story as a way to both connect and relate. So I want to thank you so much for your perspective today. As always, we found a really interesting topic and we went super deep, which is what I love to do in these conversations. For those of you who want to learn a little bit more about Kevin, what he does, his coaching services, Kevin, where can they find you?
You can find me at unstuckcoachinc.com. And we've got a Instagram account, Unstuck Coach Inc. as well. So
I'm not following you on Instagram yet. I've got to. Are your climbs on Instagram, or where can we find your climbing expedition?
Yeah, I share life lessons from the mountains, which is both a general statement and actually the name of a piece of content that I'm launching. And I share pictures from the climbs and just general thoughts on topics that come up in life coaching as well. So.
And you have a podcast of your own, correct?
I do have a podcast as well. The podcast is called Unstuck with Kevin Adler, and it's a series of very powerful conversations like this one with amazing people doing amazing things. And we look at their journey to their current success, places along the way where they face adversity and have gotten stuck, and how they move through that stuckness and what advice they have for other people who are facing their own forms of stuckness. And I've been lucky enough to talk to some pretty extraordinary people. So
that's wonderful. Well, it's been an incredible hour here. I want to again appreciate you for stepping in, for your perspective, sharing a bit of your own story. And we look forward to many more of these discussions. As I mentioned at the top of the hour, the Navigating Now Roundtable series is really meant for these discussions and these leaders who bring their own stories to the table on a week-to-week basis. So we go live every Thursday at 3 p.m. You can find us at thoughttium.com/live. We typically post the agenda a week or two prior to the episode. You can register to join via Zoom, or we're always live on social media, particularly LinkedIn and YouTube. I want to thank those folks who joined via Zoom, as well as those folks who tuned in on LinkedIn. We look forward to seeing you next Thursday at 3 o'clock. Have a good week, everybody.